loss of lives in Libya, and as well as many other places, particularly the last few months. But going seemingly unnoticed is probably just as great a disaster that's happening in Cote d'Ivoire right now as we speak. I came to the floor yesterday, and I talked about the fact that elections took place in Cote d'Ivoire last November. The incumbent president, Laurent Gbagbo, was challenged by Alassane Ouattara. They claim that Ouattara won the election. Ouattara comes from the north, the Muslim area up there. And then we found so much voter fraud that we identified and we specifically talked about on the Senate floor that I've asked Secretary Clinton by letter twice to intervene and demand a new election. Now, when I say voter fraud, I entered this in the record yesterday, so I won't do it again today. But this shows how they miscalculated all of those votes up in the north. In just one precinct, 1,000 votes. Well, actually, 94,873. Now, obviously, if we have 100,000 or so votes in one precinct, it can happen that way. But just use logic. If all else fails, stop and think about this. How could it be possible that in the northern part of Cote d'Ivoire, that when they had the election, what we would call the primary election, President Gbagbo got thousands of votes in each one of the precincts. And yet, when the runoff came, he got 0. That is a statistical impossibility. And I think for those of us, certainly the United States thought that UN and perhaps France was accurate in their initial response to this thing, but we're going to have to get something done. Let me go ahead and finish what happened. I mentioned yesterday in the town of Cote. The Ouattara's forces, along with the French, went in there, murdered about, we think it's something over 1,000 people. We get the reports from the Red Cross and from other sources. But when Ouattara has tried to deny his involvement in the slaughter, his forces took the town earlier, and this was a week after the Gbagbo forces had gone. And I think we could just look at Inhofe, who is the deputy head of the United Nations mission in Cote d'Ivoire. He said that the Ouattara's forces had carried out the killings in Cote. Quote, "We have evidence, we have pictures, this was retaliation." And so we have all this evidence that I mentioned yesterday was a part of it. I read yesterday from The Guardian, the British Guardian, the UN mission has traditional hunters known as dozos, fought alongside Ouattara's forces and took part in killing 330 people in the western town of Cote, which we now know is over 1,000 people. The International Committee of Red Cross said at least 800 people. And it goes on, which I made a part of the record yesterday. But in addition to that, we have a statement that was made in the BBC yesterday. Keep in mind now, they have in Cote, they murdered all these people. They have mass graves. The people are charred and burned. And I'm going to quote right now, so hold your stomachs. "I spot 4 pigs eating something dark and charred in the courtyard, standing by a newly dug mass grave. A UN soldier from Morocco is choking with rage and grief. I ask him if the dead are children. He nods and begins to sob quietly into his face mask." So we know of this disaster that is taking place, and here we do nothing, and we know about it. And I just will say, America, wake up. The massacre could have been avoided if Ouattara had accepted the mediation effort from the African Union. President Gbagbo did accept, Ouattara did not, and he rejected it, and I think we know why he rejected it, because he wants that power, he wants that job. Well, anyway, where we are now, and I'm going to try to get this all in, the United States has, I think, should call for the ceasefire and for a new election. I have also been told within the last day that the United Nations helicopters, U.S. peacekeeping helicopters, are firing upon Gbagbo's military camp. Lastly, I've sent a letter to the Foreign Relations Committee Chairman John Kerry. Let me applaud John Kerry. He has agreed to hold a hearing to look at this. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate it, because it takes courage to stand up against the United Nations and France and our State Department and admit that we have to look into this thing. So that's exactly what we're going to do. But that was yesterday on the floor. What's happened? What happened last night? Last night, the job was finished. They went in and they massacred I don't know how many people. You see, President Gbagbo had young children that were surrounding his palace and his residence, and they're willing to sacrifice their lives to save their country from the French influence that they're getting with Ouattara. And they were armed with baseball bats and 2x4s. I don't know, there are hundreds of them out there. And last night, Sarkozy had gone to the Secretary General Moon and said, use my forces to end this, and they did, and we know what happened last night. Maybe you don't know what happened last night. They went in with helicopters and with rockets, and they destroyed most of a town, of a major city, Abidjan, the capital of Cote d'Ivoire. And we have evidence. I hope that people will take advantage of this, particularly those people. I know there are a lot of people out there that are just opposed to any intervention that we have, and they don't really care about sub-Saharan Africa. No one cares about sub-Saharan Africa. I've stood on this floor time and time again, back when we were sending troops into Bosnia, and the excuse was ethnic cleansing. I said, for every one day in any town, in any country in sub-Saharan Africa, there are more people ethnically cleansed than any day in Bosnia. But nobody seems to care. So we have hundreds of kids around there, and last night they were mowed down. If anyone questions this, you can access on my internet, inhofe.senate.gov, and get the YouTube that shows graphically what they are doing. I don't know how many hundreds, how many thousands of people have been brutally murdered last night by the French supporting Ouattara, and it's something that we need to get involved in. And when I look at President Obiang, who's from Equatorial Guinea, he's the chairman of the African Union. He says he condemned the foreign intervention in Ivory Coast, and we stand by idly and we don't do anything about it. So again, I'm going to renew my request to Secretary Clinton and to the State Department and to others who really care about the loss of innocent life in sub-Saharan Africa, specifically in Abidjan in Cote d'Ivoire, to come forward and help us in this hearing to find that justice is done. I hope that President Gbagbo and his wife Simone, good friends, I hope they're not dead today. They might be dying as we speak. They're raiding their residence, they're raiding the palace, and it's a brutal mess. So I don't think I've ever seen in the years that I've been here, particularly coming from French, supported by Sarkozy, the raid on innocent lives in sub-Saharan Africa. And with that, I will yield the floor. And if no one else comes in, I'm going to talk longer. All right. I ask unanimous consent that I be permitted to speak until someone comes in to speak.
Without objection.
Madam President, I guess you might wonder why I'm concerned about this. I've had an interest in sub-Saharan Africa for quite some time. And after 9/11, finally, the United States of America decided they would do something of concern in sub-Saharan Africa. And so what we have had since that time is an interest in helping them to build African brigades as the terrorists come down through the Horn of Africa and Djibouti, and they come into the continent of Africa. We need to help the Africans build brigades so that they can resist them. Not doing it for them, not doing it in place of the Africans doing it, but to help them so they can defend themselves. That's exactly what we've been doing. And I've been honored to be kind of the point man on the Armed Services Committee to go over and work with these guys. Our countries in Africa are our friends. They participate in programs like the IMET program that allows us to train their officers in the United States of America, like the Train and Equip program that allows us to work with them and train these individuals. And so when you see something, an atrocity like this that takes place, and you just visualize the young kids that are out there being brutally murdered, it's something that we should do something about. Again, I'm going to praise someone who philosophically I've not agreed with most of the time that I've spent here in the United States Senate. That's Senator John Kerry. He's the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee. I'm on that committee, as well as the Armed Services Committee, and he is very sympathetic to what's going on over there and has agreed to having a hearing. There's a man named Mel Teodora. Mel Teodora was the mayor of, when I first met him, mayor of Abidjan in Cote d'Ivoire. He is currently a member of parliament in Cote d'Ivoire. He is the head of an opposing party, political party to President Gbagbo in Cote d'Ivoire, and yet he has come, in fact, he was a candidate against President Gbagbo. He was a candidate against him when he ran successfully for president. Now, here's a guy who would have every reason to be opposed to President Gbagbo, and yet he is willing to testify before Senator Kerry's committee that not only did they rig the election, but if he just used but showed the documentation on rigging the election, that we should be in a position where we could strongly recommend that we have that we recommend another election. I have nothing against Alassane Ouattara, except I do know that he has been an enemy of the Gbagbos since long before 2002, when he was opposed to him. This is, I guess, the final kill. But what expense is this coming? It's coming at a high expense of a number of that we can't quantify today. If you don't believe it, look it up, and you can get the YouTube site, and you can watch what happened last night, and you can get that off of my website, inhofe.senate.gov. Now, I see that my very good friend, Senator Manchin, a new senator from West Virginia, before I